Alrighty, well, as more people keep coming in here, I'll go ahead and just do some introductions. Hello, everyone. My name's Elizabeth Spickerman. I am the operations coordinator here at Voice. I am very excited for this presentation today and very grateful for everyone to be joining us. This topic is incredibly important. Your vote may not count, so I'm excited to see this presentation. Today, our presenter is Denise Lieberman. She has joined us from the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition. She's the director and general counsel, and she is an incredible person on this topic, and I'm very excited to see and hear what she has to say. So just to hear in a little bit, I'm going to let a couple more people join in. We will have her get started on her presentation. Some quick general housekeeping things. We do have the chat feature open. If anything is going wrong or you have anything that you want to alert us to, you're welcome to pop it in the chat. We'll also be responding and putting some different things in there as the presentation goes on. Additionally, we do have the question and answer feature on this webinar. So please, any questions that you have, go ahead and pop that in that feature, and we will make sure to leave some time at the end for Denise or Voice to answer any questions that you have. So there will definitely be time at the end for those questions to be answered. So please feel free to use that feature. Additionally, just some general things that are coming up. We are so excited about this webinar. We do have another webinar coming up on October 11th for Residents' Rights Month. That'll be presented by our own program director, Chin Hung. So definitely, if you have any questions about that or any questions about this one or previous webinars, please just let us know. Additionally, last thing before I'll let Denise get started here, we do have a survey at the end of this webinar that'll pop up automatically onto your screen. So we do ask if you can to go ahead and fill that out, but it's just a quick one, and we appreciate any feedback we can get from you. So I think we are probably is all in right now. As more people come in, they can join, but I will go ahead and turn this over to Denise.
Hi, thank you so much. And thank you so much to Voice for having me here today. It's a real pleasure and an honor to be here with you to talk about Missouri's new voting rules. And today is a pretty apropos day to have this discussion, since it is in fact Election Day in the city of St. Louis. And today is the first time that Missouri's new voting rules are in effect. So we'll get a little front page preview of what is going on. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen just a second. Okay. And we'll get started. So again, thank you so much for having me. I put a slightly different title on this title page because even though I believe it's true that there are provisions in this new law that make voting much more difficult, and it is possible that your vote will not count, I really want to inspire everyone to believe that their vote will count, and that we, working together, can help make sure that everybody's voice can be heard. I'll say that this new voting law will have a disproportionate impact on our seniors and voters with disabilities. And so I want to share with you today some key provisions of this law and some of the ways that I think we can work around it to help make sure that everybody has the tools they need to be able to make their voice heard. And ultimately, that I believe is our goal. And it's so important, whether you are a long-term care resident yourself, or whether you are an advocate or care worker, for everybody to know what those rules are. We know that anytime we change the rules of the game, especially midway through an election cycle, it can leave people really confused. And to be honest, that confusion all too often leads to deterrence, and people say, I just don't really know what these rules are. I'm just not gonna go. And so we want to make sure that you are able to. I'm here today representing the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition. I am the director and general counsel. We are a nonpartisan statewide table in Missouri that includes approximately 60 affiliated organizations that represent all kinds of different communities that care about the right to vote and that are disproportionately impacted by barriers to the ballot. So we have civil rights organizations, senior organizations, youth organizations, organizations representing voters with disabilities, organizations representing new Americans and English plus communities, civil rights organizations, civic engagement organizations, and much, much more. We undertake our mission to ensure that the ballot is accessible to all Missouri's voters through 4 buckets of work, including policy advocacy. We anchor tracking of legislation in the Missouri General Assembly, and we do a voting rights legislative tracker every year to help really kind of translate what's in the bills and provide talking points and let people know when hearings are coming up so that they can make their voice heard in the legislative process. We also anchor the coordination of strategic litigation and legal advocacy. We currently have 3 lawsuits going on right now, challenging various aspects of Missouri's election law. And we really help bring together kind of key experts and key players in the areas that will help elevate the importance of our voting rights. Our 3rd bucket of work is voter education and engagement. This is really the most important piece of what we do. We produce palm cards and toolkits and come to programs like this because we know that knowledge is power, and it is absolutely key to ensuring that people have the tools they need to successfully make their voice heard. And finally, we coordinate statewide non-election protection activities in the state of Missouri. And this is a fabulous program. It includes an toll-free hotline, 866-687-8683. These calls are answered in real time by attorneys on election day. All those attorneys are located here in the state of Missouri. They're Missouri attorneys. They understand the landscape on the ground, and they can provide immediate assistance in real time. Our goal is to ensure that no voter place without casting this right now available all the way through election day. If you have questions about those voters, long-term care residents who are having difficulties navigating this process, I want you to call us because we can help immediately. This election protection program also includes hundreds of poll monitors that we place at polling places throughout the state of Missouri on election day who have materials, voting rights materials, and their only job is to be a friendly face for voters and to help voters navigate any issues or problems they may be confronting at the polls. And our coalition meets every single week. This work is really busy these days with the new law in effect and elections coming up. And we also have an action alert. We send out about 1 email a week. And so we welcome your involvement. If you're interested in getting those action alerts, you can text us, text MOVPC to 66866. You can email us info@movpc.org, or you can sign up directly at bit.ly/protectmovoters. All right, well, we know that elections are coming up and we've got new voting rules in effect, and they just went into effect on August 28th. So that means that for those of you that went to go vote early in August in the primary elections, the rules that you voted under in August are different than the rules you're going to be voting under in November. And this new voting law, which came through the legislature as House Bill 1878, is an enormous bill. It has more than 36 different provisions in it, and it can be a little difficult to navigate everything that's in it. So I'm trying to break it down. I have this fact sheet available for you all here. I'm going to put a link to this fact sheet into the chat, and I'm going to go through some of the key provisions that are most likely to affect you or the people that you're working with. And I do want to say at the outset that the communities that we're talking about here, our seniors, people with disabilities, make up an enormous part of our voting population. And certainly these are communities that face some of the greatest barriers to participation. Nearly a sixth of America's total electorate identify as someone with a disability or a mobility issue or may face barriers to voting. The good news is that there are lots of laws at the federal and state level, even in spite of Missouri's new voting law, that continue to require accessible voting for people who need it. Well, let's get into what this new law in Missouri requires, and then I'm going to share some tips for how we can ensure that everyone can have their voices heard. The Missouri legislature passed a new voting law this year in the final 24 hours of the legislative session. And at the end of June, Governor Mike Parson signed this bill into law. It went into effect on August 28th. And while many people think about this new law as a voter ID law, which it is, it actually has quite a few other provisions in it as well. This is a photograph of the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition's lobby day back in May when this bill came to a floor vote in the Missouri Senate. We were all there to let legislators know how we felt about it. But in truth, this bill has a lot more in it than just voter ID. It has a lot of provisions, including provisions that affect the ability of civic engagement organizations or care facilities to provide assistance for voters that need help accessing voter registration or accessing absentee voting. And I'm going to focus on those two pieces today, along with the voter ID requirements. But keep in mind that this legislation does a lot of things. I'm going to cover these three pieces of the new bill that we are currently challenging in court. First off, I want to start with voter registration. Because not only does House Bill 1878 disparately impact our seniors by making it harder for them to vote in person if they don't have a non-expired Missouri ID, this legislation also makes it more difficult for civic engagement organizations that work to help ensure these very same populations have access to the political process. All these words are what the actual statute looks like. But in short, the new rule is that nobody can be paid or otherwise compensated for soliciting a voter registration application. Now, what does that mean? Well, it's somewhat unclear. But what it does mean is that organizations, except for government agencies, so some of you may work for government agencies. If you do, this ban does not apply to you. Government agencies, some of which are required by law to offer voter registration, can still pay staff to do so. However, non-government agencies cannot pay staff to do voter registration. In addition, the measure says that no one can be paid or otherwise compensated to solicit voter registration. We don't know what it means to otherwise compensate, which means that it potentially could include even reimbursing volunteers or providing them gifts or even water or pizza as part of the voter registration activity. The second piece of the voter registration restriction is, first off, nobody can be paid or compensated to do voter registration, meaning staff should not be involved in doing voter registration. Voter registration must be conducted by volunteers. On top of that, those volunteers must register with the Secretary of State's office as a voter registration solicitor if they anticipate that they may end up registering 10 or more people in any election cycle. That's a 2-year period. In short, every volunteer basically needs to register with the Secretary of State's office as a solicitor. And the third piece of this is now that all voter registration solicitors must be over the age of 18 and registered voters in the state of Missouri themselves. Meaning, and this may not apply to all of you, but for example, we work with communities where high school students who may not be old enough yet to register to vote are involved in staffing voter registration tables at their high schools. That would not be allowed under this provision, or out-of-state college students who are not registered in Missouri can't staff that voter registration drive on campus, etc. So in short, who can get paid to do voter registration? Government entities or someone paid by the government. Who cannot get paid or compensated to do voter registration? Not non-governmental entities, nonprofits, or individuals. And anybody who expects to solicit 10 or more registrations has to register with the Secretary of State. Now, it's unclear in the law what it means to be paid or otherwise compensated. In fact, it's even unclear in the law what it means to solicit a voter registration. Here in Missouri, people can register to vote online. So it is unclear whether this ban applies only to the act of physically taking a physical application from a voter, or whether it would also be considered soliciting voter registration to provide a link to the Secretary of State's website. We know that many of our partners, like the League of Women Voters, have a QR code on postcards that they send out that links directly to the Secretary of State's application page. That potentially could be seen as soliciting voter registration. There is a similar limitation for absentee ballot applications. This is the second piece I want to share with you today. And this one is far more likely to affect many of you on the call right now. Under the new law, it is illegal for any individual, group, or party to solicit a voter into obtaining an absentee ballot application. I know that's not worded very well. That's why I put it in quotes. This is the actual language of the statute. So again, it is illegal for anyone to solicit a voter into obtaining an absentee ballot application. Unfortunately, as I mentioned, nowhere in the entire statute does it define what activity constitutes soliciting a voter. So we don't really know what it means to solicit an absentee ballot application, but we do know it's illegal for anyone to do so under any circumstance. And the penalty is pretty severe. It's a Class 1 election offense, which means it's a possible felony conviction if convicted, that could include a fine and even possible jail time and loss of voting rights in Missouri for the rest of your life. So the kinds of questions I get a lot from folks, of course, that deal with seniors and that deal with people with disabilities are, of course, that these are the very communities who most need to get absentee ballot applications. Because here in Missouri, you don't automatically get to vote absentee, right? You have to apply. Now, there is one piece of this new law that does allow Missouri voters to 2 weeks before Election Day to vote absentee in person without providing a reason, as long as they show a state-issued photo ID. However, that is only applicable to people who can physically get to the election office within those 2 weeks before Election Day. And that typically does not include evenings or weekends, except for the final weekend before Election Day. So we know that there are many people who physically cannot get to the election office during working hours. Some because they may be low-wage workers or essential workers not able to get off work, and others because they lack transportation or have other mobility impairments that would make it very difficult for them to physically get to the office. These are the people that need to get that absentee ballot sent to them in the mail. And to get an absentee ballot in the mail, you need to provide a reason, and you need to indicate that reason on an absentee ballot application that needs to get sent to the election authority. And so, who are these people? The people that need to get absentee ballots in the mail are people who are homebound, people who are in care facilities, people who have mobility impairments, people who lack transportation or no longer drive, people with disabilities. These are precisely the communities that you work with who need to get access to absentee ballot applications, but they're also the communities that are least likely to have the tools and resources to get an absentee ballot application. Now, I will say that applications are available online. And what many groups, especially groups that work with seniors and people with disabilities, often do is print out a stack of absentee ballot applications and make them available either at their facility or as part of home health visits. They'll carry absentee ballot applications in their packets. Unfortunately, we have to recommend that you not do that any longer, because it is now illegal for anyone to solicit a voter into obtaining an absentee ballot application. And because this law is so unclear and doesn't define what it means to solicit an absentee ballot, indeed potentially even suggesting to a voter that they should apply for an absentee ballot if they can't make it to the polls on Election Day, might be seen as soliciting an absentee ballot application. It's for that reason that the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition, along with the ACLU and Campaign Legal Center, filed a lawsuit challenging both the voter registration and the absentee ballot restrictions. We brought this lawsuit on behalf of the League of Women Voters of Missouri and the Missouri NAACP, but really it is on behalf of all of these groups that work to help ensure that the communities they work with have access to the process. So this lawsuit was filed several weeks ago, right before the law went into effect on August 28th. We have sought what's called a preliminary injunction. We're asking for these two pieces of the law to be held while the court further reviews their constitutionality. We're arguing that these provisions violate the right to free speech and expression of organizations that work to educate people about voting and encourage voting. And we also are arguing that that language is so vague that it's really unclear what activity is prohibited under the law. And with those penalties as severe as they are, it can really lead to deterrence of providing help to folks because you don't know what activity is criminalized. However, there are some things that you can still do. So, can you still offer voter registration at your facilities? Even if you're not a government-funded facility? Yes, but don't have staff doing that voter registration. You can have volunteers do it. There are volunteers with the League of Women Voters and other organizations that are happy to come to your facility and do that voter registration completely as volunteers. So you're not paying anybody to do it. We also encourage you not to compensate if you're organizing volunteers yourself. We encourage you not to compensate them or even really reimburse them for expenses or provide gifts or food or treats during that activity. In addition, if you do have a volunteer corps that you're going to have be available to help with voter registration, have them complete the voter registration solicitor form. Unfortunately, it's not super easy. The form is available online at sos.mo.gov/elections. You can fill out most of the form online, like your name and your address and your phone number. However, it does require an actual signature. And so to complete this form, you will need to print the form out and sign it and then get it back to the Secretary of State's office, either via email if you have a scanner, or fax, or by US mail. One thing we're encouraging groups to do is to print out a whole stack of those solicitor forms. And if you've got a volunteer day coming up, have everybody fill them out, whether they're convinced they're going to do voter registration or not. It will cover them for the entire election cycle. Some groups like the League have also adopted a policy requiring that any volunteers send proof that they submitted this form. I don't want you to be fearful about voter registration, because you can still do voter registration as long as you are not paid and as long as volunteers complete this form. And so we can also talk about the importance of voter registration. Voter Registration Day, National Voter Registration Day, is September 20th. I would encourage you to have signage just recognizing National Voter Registration Day. It's a good time to encourage people to check their voter registrations online and make sure that they are registered. Here in Missouri, the voter registration deadline for the November elections is October 12th. I have another thought as well on those absentee ballots. While it is now illegal to solicit any voter into obtaining an absentee ballot application, and therefore we are recommending that you do not any longer have a stack of those absentee ballot applications laying out or handing them to people, one option that many folks in your community could avail themselves of is to sign up themselves to be on the permanent absentee voter list. You may be familiar with this list. This is not anything new, but what it does do is it allows anyone who attests that they are confined due to illness or disability to get on this permanent absentee voter list. And the great thing about this list is if you're on it, the election authority automatically sends you an absentee ballot application every election. You don't have to vote absentee just because you're on this list, but the application will come to you. You no longer need then to be the middleman or woman in getting that person an absentee ballot application. And it's not difficult to sign up. You do need to complete a form. Those forms are available on your local election authority website. If you're in St. Louis City, that would be the St. Louis City Board of Elections. If you're in St. Louis County, it would be St. Louis County Board of Elections. If you're in St. Charles County, it would be St. Charles County. The person needs to attest that they are largely confined. People living in long-term care facilities would qualify as confined. It doesn't mean that they can never leave, right? It means that they're largely confined. They do not need to provide a reason. They do not need to share medical information about the nature of their impairment or their disability or their illness. nor do they need to provide any medical documentation, but they sign it attesting that they are basically homebound and they will get on this list. The final thing I want to share, and we can then open it up for questions. The third piece of this new law has to do with the kinds of ID that voters can show to verify their identity when they go to vote in person. And this part has also changed. So, let's see. What this new law does, and this applies to any in-person voting. So that's in-person absentee or in-person at the polls on election day. This new law eliminates some of the forms of identification that voters could previously use to verify their identity at the polls, leaving just a non-expired Missouri or federal ID. So if you see this photo here, this poster represents the forms of ID that were acceptable to vote as recently as the August primary elections, when people could use, for example, a voter registration card that the election authority sent, or a student ID from a Missouri college or university, or even a current government document with their name and address on it, or even an expired ID or a license from another state. All of those, except for the Missouri or federal ID, have been eliminated. And now voters must show either a non-expired Missouri driver or non-driver license, a non-expired military or veterans ID card, or a non-expired US passport or other state identification issued by the state of Missouri or the federal government. And if you do not have one of these, you do not have a non-expired Missouri or federal ID, and you're voting in person, you can cast a provisional ballot, but that ballot does not automatically count. It will be counted only if you return back to your polling place by the close of polls on election day with a valid photo ID. So that option is really just for people that maybe just accidentally left their ID at home when they came earlier, and you'll have to go back and stand in line again, something that will be more burdensome for our seniors. Or if the signature on the provisional ballot envelope matches the signature that the election authority has on file for you with your voter registration. And you see that blue envelope there, that is the provisional ballot envelope. When someone casts, if they show up without a non-expired Missouri or federal ID, and they cast a provisional ballot, they're going to have to complete that entire form. If that entire form is not complete, even if they're a valid registered voter, that ballot will not be counted. On that ballot, you have to attest that you don't have a state issued photo ID, but you understand that it's required, and you have to sign it. That's the signature that gets compared. In addition, 2 poll workers also have to sign it, or it won't be counted. In addition, we know that for many people, that signature may not match. Disproportionately, our seniors and our people with disabilities. My mother is 91 years old. She has developed a hand tremor, an essential tremor, and she cannot replicate her signature any longer. And that's really true for many people in this circumstance. And the truth of the matter is that there are a lot of folks who fall into this boat. Over 200,000 Missouri registered voters don't have a Missouri non-expired ID. And here's how the numbers break down. The Secretary of State's office did a comparison of the voter rolls against IDs held by the Department of Revenue. Over 137,000 registered voters did not have a Missouri ID on file with the Department of Revenue. An additional 140,000 had an expired ID that had been expired long enough that they would have to start the process over. And that is where the burden comes in, because the only place you can get a state ID in the state of Missouri is your local DMV, motor vehicle office. And you have to do it in person because they have to take your photo. So in fact, I was just talking with a local legislator who has a constituent who is homebound, is bedbound, and can't get there to the DMV to get that photograph taken. It's also burdensome because not everyone can get to the DMV. Many DMV offices are not open evenings or weekends. So for people who have to work, who can't take off in the middle of the day, they're going to be burdened by that. But many are also not located on public transportation routes for people who rely on public transportation. And there's many people who just don't have transportation to a DMV office. Not every county in Missouri even has a DMV office, and not all of them are accessible to voters with disabilities. I took my own mother, my 91-year-old mother. She has an expired driver's license, by the way, which has served her just fine because all the information remains the same. She hasn't moved. The address is the same. The phone number is the same. Her photo looks like her. But I took her to the DMV like in the middle of the day on a Tuesday to try and get her a state ID. And, you know, she's in a wheelchair mostly, but also uses a walker sometimes. There was a step to get into the DMV office. I had to lug like, you know, several pieces of equipment just to help her get in the door. And then we had a 3-hour wait. She has congestive heart failure. The room was crowded full of people. This was some months ago when the COVID rates were higher, you know, coughing all over the place. I felt like I was putting her at risk, even just waiting in line to get to the front of the line. And that's before you even get to the underlying documents necessary to get a state ID, like a certified birth certificate. To get a state ID, you need to provide proof of identity, like a certified birth certificate, lawful status, proof of your social security number, like a social security card, and proof of residency. If your name has changed since birth, you will also need to provide legal documents of that name change. For example, if you have been married and divorced or gotten a court-ordered legal name change. And for people whose underlying documents may have errors in them, it can be particularly challenging to get those underlying documents reconciled. That is precisely why, in the past, the Missouri Supreme Court has concluded that an ID requirement may violate Missourians' right to vote. The plaintiff in that case was a woman named Kathleen Weinshank. You see her in this photo. She passed away a few years ago. She had cerebral palsy, didn't drive, and couldn't replicate her signature, but was otherwise extremely civically active and engaged, and was impacted by this law. We have filed a second lawsuit based on the same arguments that have been made twice prior, concluding that eliminating these forms of ID is burdensome to Missouri's voters. And we have sought a motion to expedite that in advance of the November elections. I will note that the law does require the state of Missouri to provide one form of ID without cost to voters who need one. And they also need to help you get underlying documents like a birth certificate, but that ends up being much, much harder if those underlying documents, A, don't exist. So I have a lot of elderly clients who were born at home and that information was written in the family Bible, no birth certificate. It's going to be more difficult if that birth certificate is from out of state. In fact, 17 states plus the District of Columbia require you to send a copy of a photo ID to get a copy of your birth certificate, which is necessary to get a copy of your photo ID in Missouri. When I took my mom, and I know this rule inside and out, I brought a stack of documents like that. She's so organized at 91 years old. She has her certified birth certificate. She had her original social security card. You know what she didn't have? Her marriage license from 1949. Because it wasn't filed with the state of Missouri. It was on a ketubah. It was a marriage from a temple. And we couldn't get her the ID. So that's why we brought that suit. I want to stop here with a very, very short video that will kind of outline some of that, and it actually includes my mother in it. Let me know quickly if you cannot hear this once I start playing it. Whoops. Okay, hang on. I apologize. Let's do that. It should work. Wait, can you see this? Okay, yes. Okay, hang on. Can you hear? Hang on, not yet.
My name is Joy Lieberman. I live in St. Louis, Missouri. I voted in every election since 1952. I believe that's 60 years. My involvement with education was almost accidental. I'm not a teacher. I'm not an educator. I was a very active parent, and when the school district was going through a very traumatic time, I figured, hey, I'll submit myself for this. They won't choose me. And they did. And I spent 24 years on the Board of Education.
My name is Emmanuel Aziz. I live in St. Louis, Missouri. I've been a registered voter since the early 80s. Okay, the poster on the wall is of me playing with my band, the Son of Star Child Band, and we had an opportunity to play a lot of places and open up for a lot of people. First started off playing drums when I was a kid, and eventually I made it to the front mic, and I am a front man, as you can see. Cheese.
Well, there's a problem on my birth certificate. The name everyone knows me by, Joy Lieberman. Joy is not my first name, and it's not on my birth certificate. And I discovered that when I was in my mid-40s, thought nothing of it. It was a non-issue until this whole matter of photo IDs reared its head. And I realized that the next time I have to renew my driver's license and present this birth certificate, I'm going to be in big trouble, probably not able to vote.
Everybody's got something they got to go through in life, something that they have to deal with. And my test happens to be multiple sclerosis. I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis in 2006, I believe. Some people can't get a state ID because they're in a nursing home like myself, and sometimes you're not able to just get up and get in your car and just go get your ID. You pretty much need to get help. Everybody who's disabled should be a registered voter and being able to vote.
My parents were the first generation in each of their family to be born here. And I'll tell you, they impressed upon me how important it was to vote. And when I thought my right to vote was going to be infringed upon, I was furious. This country fought a war so we wouldn't be taxed without representation. Now, if I lose the right to vote, will the state of Missouri deny my taxes? I don't think so.
Voting means a lot to me because of the fact that my voice is being heard. And I believe that everybody should be able to have their voice heard.
I am an American citizen. It's my right and my duty to participate.
Just because I'm in a wheelchair doesn't mean I can't stand up for my right to vote.
This is your country. You deserve a say-so into who's governing it and how it's being governed.
No matter what.
Against any odds.
November 6th, I'm voting.
November 6th, I am voting.
So that is where we are. We're hoping that we will be successful in this lawsuit, but we're also wanting to make sure that people have the IDs that they need. And so a number of our partners have put together ID clinics to help people get IDs if they need them. The very first one really was quite a success. And we had a training last night for other organizations that wanted to set up ID clinics as well. But keep in mind that it's only necessary for people that want to go vote in person, and people that are getting an absentee ballot by mail don't need to present that state issued photo ID. But keep in mind that the law still requires all voting to be accessible and that people have a right to assistance and that people have a right to ensure that they have the help they need to be able to cast a ballot. And if you have any questions, you are always welcome to call me and to report any issues into the Election Protection Hotline at 866-OUR-VOTE. And we'll be happy to provide you with some additional materials if you want to have them at your facility, and be on the lookout for our volunteers at the polls this November. So thank you so much. And I look forward to any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much, Denise. This was an incredible presentation. That video was amazing to watch as well. That's such a sweet video. So we had a couple of questions come in through the Q&A feature, so I'll go ahead and just kind of repeat those out. The first thing we had come through was either a statement or a question saying taking clients to receive a new Missouri ID is not considered any form of soliciting. Does that sound accurate to you?
Correct. Yeah. So, I mean, and it's a good question because this is so complicated. The solicitation bans are you can't solicit voter registration and you can't solicit absentee ballots. But yes, you can help them go get a photo ID. And then if they go to the DMV is a government agency and they are supposed to ask and solicit voter registration. That's why this is confusing.
Gotcha. Yeah, that is quite confusing. Thank you for that clarification. Visiting clients at a nursing facility and they ask for help to vote, absentee does not negate the term soliciting since they asked. If so, should they sign the form that you mentioned?
Yeah, so this is also confusing because Missouri law and federal law guarantee the right to assistance in casting a ballot. What you can't do is have those applications out. So the person has to request the application themselves. But if they need assistance completing it, they have a right to assistance in completing it. But then, yes, you need to sign the portion of the absentee ballot application that indicates you provided assistance. So my mother is in the same boat she is now because of all the craziness around getting her an ID. Because her license is expired. She couldn't go vote in person. She is now on the permanent absentee voter list. So she automatically gets her application in the mail, but because she can't fill out the bubble because of her hand tremor, I can fill out the bubble on her behalf. But I couldn't, although the law does include a provision allowing immediate family members to make the request for an absentee ballot. So I can help her fill it out if she needs help, which she does. And then I sign saying I provided assistance. I think the main thing is don't have the stacks of applications sitting out. And if you have people that are going out to do home health care somewhere that typically have stacks of that stuff in their papers, and like, good for you if you were, probably not. Hold off on that right now. I have some confidence that this law is going to get struck down. There have been these kinds of rules have been passed recently. All of this is really, really new in other states, where now we're seeing not only kind of efforts to make it harder for the voter to vote, but we're seeing all these new laws that make it harder for people to assist voters in need as well. And this is kind of in that category. Several of these kinds of laws have already been struck down in other states because that language is so vague. And so I have hope that that could get clarified here as well.
Gotcha. Alrighty. Well, the next question I have is, how would you go about getting seniors registered? This person worked in a skilled nursing facility, and there are a few of their residents who are either not registered or registered in the city, not the county. They do not have photo ID, passports, etc.
So you can still register voters. You, not if you're on staff though, so you can't be paid. Let me find this real quick, just a second. I do have like some suggestions here. You cannot be paid, and the folks will need to be voter registration solicitors. So I have a couple of suggestions that you could do. One, don't get paid. So if you are on staff, don't do it yourself. But guess what? There's lots of volunteers who are willing to come into your skilled nursing facility, like the Legal Women Voters, and they're all volunteers. If you are soliciting volunteers, and hey, you might have people that like that volunteer at your facility doing activities and things, they could also do that. If you are getting volunteers though, make sure they fill out this form right here. Otherwise, call us. You can call the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition. We can put the word out that volunteers are needed to come do voter registration at a particular location. And those people would be volunteers, and therefore then none of your paid staff would be getting paid or compensated for it.
Great, thank you. And then I have another question that came through the chat saying that they work with residents with dementia who wouldn't necessarily know how to ask for it. What happens in this situation? Also, at what point does a person with dementia lose the right to vote?
Yeah, good question. Oh, it's such a good question. I think I'm going to start actually with that one first. Hang on a second. I have a slide for it because it's kind of confusing. Here we go. You have to be adjudicated mentally incapacitated to be ineligible to vote. And it's kind of confusing because there's a part of the Missouri Constitution that says that no one with a guardian is entitled to vote, but that's not actually true. That is an old language from the Constitution that refers to just like this partial guardianship. Missouri statutes, the 475.075, that's the guardianship piece, requires a court, if they're doing a guardianship, to make specific findings, including whether the person retains the right to vote. So it's quite possible that a person can be assigned a guardian, but still found to be competent to vote. So like Kathleen Weinshank, who had cerebral palsy, is a good example of that. She needed assistance physically to manage things. She had a guardian, but she retained competency to vote. It's typically going to be that probate judge that will determine competency and determine if they're not competent to vote. Missouri Protection and Advocacy Services is one of our partners and does a lot of work in this area. And they have attorneys there as well that can provide assistance at 314-256 9369.
Great, thank you so much. And then I had two just quick questions that had come through previously. So one, I think you somewhat answered, but what is there a cost associated for getting an ID for residents of long-term care facility? Excluding the cost of like transportation and stuff like that, but just the physical cost of an ID.
Well, yes and no. There can be costs. Let me just pull this up really quick. Missouri law, the bill does require the state to provide one ID without cost. It's a non-driver's license. You do have to contact the state and do the process through the state for the state to then provide those vouchers to the DMV. It is not super simple. They will also assist you in getting underlying documents like the birth certificate, etc. But if there are issues or challenges with those underlying documents, or if you need to get them corrected, it can start to get costly. And the only way to get these without cost is to go through the Secretary of State's office. What I will say is that that our friends that are setting up these ID clinics are using grant money to pay those costs themselves. So the clinic that we held back in August, they covered the costs of 20 Missouri birth certificates, 6 photo IDs, and 4 out-of-state certificates. So please feel free to reach out to us if you're having issues, and we can put you in touch with some of these folks as well to help ensure that your folks have the resources they need.
Great. Alrighty, well, I think those were all of the questions that we had really come through. Denise, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been incredibly useful information. As always, this recording will be available to the public shortly. So if you would like to review some of the information or share it with anyone, you're more than welcome to. Like I said previously, there will be a short survey just at the end of this call as you head out. So we would really appreciate any feedback that you have. And then there will be a follow-up as well. So thank you everyone for coming. And thank you so much, Denise, for your time.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you all of you for the work that you do with our seniors, with people with disabilities. It is so important, and I'm very grateful for all of you. Thank you.